You used to think of yourself as strong, someone with a heart big enough to forgive, patient enough to sacrifice, and loving enough to heal anyone. But one day you suddenly realized it's you who's exhausted, confused, and no longer recognizes the person you see in the mirror. You gave everything, your time, your kindness, your forgiveness. But what you got in return was coldness, blame, criticism, and the feeling that no matter what you do, it's never enough. And then you started asking yourself, what did I do wrong? How did things get this bad? Let me be clear. You are not weak. You are not foolish. You were simply targeted by someone who knows how to manipulate, someone narcissistic. A narcissist doesn't love you in the way you understand love. They don't connect with your true self. They only connect with the value they can extract from you. They survive by controlling other people's emotions, and your kindness, your sincerity, was used to feed their unstable and false sense of self. You have nothing to be ashamed of for loving genuinely. The only thing you need now is truth, to understand what really happened, to understand why you stayed, and most importantly, to know how to stop. This video isn't just a wake-up call, it's a roadmap, a real, practical guide to help you reclaim the value, the power, and the peace you truly deserve. Together, we're going to explore 5 ways a super empath, someone who's been deeply hurt, can completely break the narcissist hold. And no, I'm not talking about revenge. I'm talking about clarity, about setting boundaries, about emotional discipline, about rebuilding your life on your own terms, and ultimately, about speaking the truth, not to argue or justify, but to set yourself free. If any of this resonates with you, subscribe to this channel now, because you are not alone, and I'll be here with you in so many more videos to come. And most importantly, watch this video to the very end, because sometimes one sentence at the right moment can change the way you see your entire life. If you've ever found yourself in a relationship where you felt like you were slowly disappearing, where you gave everything and received only pain, then the first thing you need to understand is this: it wasn't random, and it certainly wasn't your fault. The narcissist didn't choose you by accident. They chose you because you were ideal for control. And here's the painful irony: the very qualities that made you a target were also the most beautiful parts of you. Your kindness, your empathy, your desire to heal, and your belief that anyone can change. Simply put, narcissists lack a stable sense of inner worth. They don't feel secure within themselves, so they rely on others to constantly affirm their value. But they don't do this through building healthy connections. They do it by controlling other people's emotions. They craft a perfect image of themselves, and then pressure you to reflect it back to them over and over. When you comply, you're rewarded with charm and praise, but when you question them, you're punished with silence, coldness, or emotional abuse. All of it serves one purpose: maintaining absolute power in the relationship. In contrast, an empath is someone deeply attuned to the emotions of others. They have powerful intuition, a desire to help, to listen, to heal. But without the right awareness, empaths often confuse compassion with emotional responsibility, feeling guilty for not being able to save others. And that's exactly the vulnerability the narcissist exploits. They quickly sense that you're someone who forgives easily, who tolerates pain quietly, who blames yourself just to keep the peace, and they use your kindness like a chain, keeping you bound to them. You weren't controlled by force, but by guilt, not through shouting, but through subtle suggestions like, "I'm only this way because of you." The beginning of the relationship is often intense. The narcissist makes you feel special, chosen, loved like never before. This is the idealization phase, a strategy to create the illusion that you found something rare and extraordinary. But soon comes the devaluation. They start criticizing what they once praised, calling you too sensitive, subtly making you feel small and inadequate. And when you react, they switch to victim mode, apologize, make promises, even cry, only to pull you right back into the idealization phase again. This repeating cycle, idealize, devalue, repeat, puts you in an emotional spin. You stop trusting your own intuition. And that's exactly what they want, for you to become dependent on the emotions they control. Why didn't you leave even when you knew you were being hurt? Because it wasn't just emotional manipulation, it was belief conditioning. You believed that if you just loved harder, they would change. That if you were more patient, they'd return to who they used to be. That your pain didn't matter as much as saving them from theirs. You took on emotional responsibilities that weren't yours. And while you were busy trying to heal them, you slowly lost yourself. Worse, they made you believe you were the problem. They twisted the truth, denied what you clearly remembered, blamed your emotions. This is gaslighting, a tactic designed to make you doubt your own memory, your feelings, even your sanity. But once you begin to see clearly, everything changes. The moment you recognize the pattern, you're no longer their pawn. You stop trying to make sense of your pain. You stop believing you're too sensitive or too much. You start to realize you were being controlled, but you no longer want to play that role. And that's when you step into a new level, not just an empath, but a super empath. Someone still full of compassion, but no longer easily manipulated. Someone who knows the difference between helping and self-destruction. Someone who starts reclaiming their life through awareness, logic, and inner strength. Right after this, I'll be sharing 5 clear, practical, and highly effective ways a super empath can break a narcissist's control, without reacting, without arguing. Step 1. Recognize the manipulation pattern. All control begins with confusion. A narcissist doesn't bind you with chains. They bind you with ambiguity. Ambiguity about emotions, about truth, about boundaries, even about who you are. To break free from that control, you must learn to recognize the pattern they're using to manipulate you, with clarity, logic, and zero justification. Nothing about a narcissist's behavior is random. Every action serves a purpose. What's more disturbing is that it's a highly repetitive cycle, especially when they realize you're someone empathetic, forgiving, and with soft self-esteem. These patterns aren't accidents. They're tactics, and once you see them, you start to break their spell. Stage 1. Idealization. It all begins beautifully. They make you feel like you're the only person in the world who truly gets them. They invest in you with attention, affection, sweet words, and often rush into declarations of love. To someone longing for a genuine connection, it feels like you've finally found the right one. But this isn't true connection, it's strategy. They're not honoring who you are. They're creating a perfect version of you so you'll believe they're the only one capable of loving you this deeply. Stage 2. Devaluation. Once they've secured your emotional investment, the shift begins, subtly but surely. Compliments fade and are replaced with veiled criticisms. You're too sensitive. You used to be more fun. Don't you think you're being controlling? At first you wonder if they're stressed or if maybe you are overreacting. But the criticism becomes consistent. They stop appreciating your efforts. They ignore your boundaries, and when you speak up, they make it seem like you're the problem. This is where their control begins to take root. Stage 3. Emotional confusion. At this point, you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells. You're afraid to say the wrong thing, unsure of what will trigger their anger or bring back the person who once made you feel special. You live in a state of quiet anxiety, unable to pinpoint exactly what's wrong. And that confusion? That's their tool. The emotional chaos keeps you off balance, trying harder and harder to fix something you can't name. But the most dangerous part? You start doubting your own mind. Stage 4. Gaslighting. When you begin to question their behavior, they deny it. I never said that. You're imagining things. You're overreacting. Slowly, you stop trusting your memories, your feelings, your instincts. Gaslighting doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be persistent. Over time, you go from someone who knows something is wrong. Once you lose trust in yourself, escaping becomes nearly impossible. Stage 5. Love bombing returns. Whenever you start to pull away, they sense it, and suddenly they shift. They're sweet again, apologetic, full of promises. You breathe a sigh of relief. They get it now. This time will be different. But it won't. That sudden sweetness is bait designed to pull you back into the cycle. And once you stay, the cycle resets. The truth must be named once you recognize the cycle, not just once, but as a recurring, intentional pattern. That's the moment you begin to wake up. You realize that you're not too sensitive, you're not too dramatic, you've been caught in a calculated system of manipulation, and you have every right to walk away from it. Awakening doesn't always come in a burst. Sometimes it's quiet. A single moment when you finally think, I'm not crazy, I'm not wrong, I'm being manipulated, and I won't stay here anymore. That's the first step, and also the hardest, to see the truth. Not sugarcoat it, not rationalize it, not defend them. Just look clearly and say, this isn't love, this is control. In the next part, we'll talk about the second step, the one thing a narcissist fears more than the truth, boundaries, and why the moment you begin to set them, their entire manipulation system starts to fall apart. Step 2. Set clear and firm boundaries. Once you start recognizing the manipulation pattern, once you see that these recurring cycles are not just coincidences or emotional outbursts, you enter a new state of awareness. But awareness alone, as important as it is not enough to break free. The next step, and truly the first action that reflects your inner transformation, is setting boundaries. Boundaries are not about revenge. They're not about shutting down or closing your heart. Boundaries are simply the clear declaration of what works for you and what doesn't, what you are willing to accept and what you can no longer overlook. When you begin setting boundaries, you're telling the world, and more importantly, yourself, that you have value, you have a voice, and you are no longer willing to sacrifice your peace to maintain a toxic relationship. A narcissist is not afraid of your anger. They've seen it, they've manipulated it, and often they've triggered it intentionally. What they truly fear is the moment you become clear, when you stop being conflicted within yourself, when you no longer justify your emotions, when you stop trying to please them by erasing your own boundaries. That's when their control begins to crumble. However, setting boundaries is not easy, especially for deeply empathetic people like you. You were likely raised to be kind, to consider others, to be the one who lets things go. You're used to avoiding conflict, to the point that when someone crosses your line, you fall silent, not because you don't notice, but because you've been conditioned to treat your needs as secondary. But the truth is this: if you keep bending, if you keep understanding without limits, you'll disappear in your own life. A narcissist won't stop because they don't see boundaries. They only see opportunity. And if you don't build a clear fence, they will keep stepping over it, keep demanding, keep controlling. You need to understand this now. Boundaries are not rebellion, they are maturity. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't need to offer lengthy justifications every time you say no. Sometimes a calm and simple sentence like, "That doesn't feel right to me," is enough to reclaim your place in the relationship. And you will notice the shift immediately. The narcissist will react, possibly with rage, blame, guilt trips, or by playing the victim. They'll say you've changed, they'll say you're cold, they'll say you're selfish. But don't let those words drag you back into the familiar gray zone, where you were always the one carrying the blame. Because the truth is, every time you say no to what harms you, you're saying yes to yourself. Every boundary you set is a workout for your self-respect. The very muscle emotional manipulation has been weakening in you for far too long. You no longer have to prove that you're worthy of respect. You don't need to keep sacrificing to preserve a relationship built on imbalance. You are starting to affirm that you too deserve safety, clarity, and respect. And here's the powerful part: when you stand up for yourself, not with rage but with clarity, you remove yourself from their game. You're no longer reacting in a way they can control. You're no longer trying to change them. You're simply holding your ground and letting them decide whether they can still walk beside you. Because from now on, you're no longer someone who compromises just to hold on to a relationship. You're someone who's willing to let go of what no longer deserves you in order to hold on to yourself. And when you set a clear boundary, what you're really doing isn't just self-protection. You are reclaiming your place at the center of your own life, a place where your emotions, your thoughts, and your values are no longer eclipsed by someone else's agenda, a place where you don't need permission to be yourself. In the next part, we will step into an even higher form of power, where your boundaries are no longer just spoken, but lived through your emotional state, neutrality. When you stop reacting the way they expect, the entire system of control they built begins to collapse. Are you ready for that next step? Step 3. Maintain emotional neutrality. Once you've set clear boundaries and start seeing changes in how you're being treated, the narcissist will often switch tactics. They'll shift from controlling your behavior to provoking your emotions, because when they can no longer manipulate what you do, they will try to control how you feel. And this is where emotional neutrality becomes your most powerful, yet quiet weapon. You need to understand this. Narcissists don't actually crave your love. They don't need authentic connection. They don't need partnership. What they need is the feeling that they still affect you. Any reaction, anger, tears, justification, disappointment, signals to them that they still hold emotional power over you. So when you react, whether negatively or positively, you're unknowingly feeding them a form of psychological fuel. That fuel sustains their sense of control, even if the relationship is falling apart. That's why remaining calm, not reacting, can be so devastating to their system. Emotional neutrality doesn't mean you're cold, indifferent, or shut off from compassion. It simply means you no longer allow them to define your emotional state or dictate your responses. You take that power back for yourself. When they criticize you, you don't defend. When they play the victim to guilt, trip you. You don't rush in to rescue. When they try to trigger your anger, you refuse to engage in the battle. You step back, not out of fear, but out of clarity. You see the game, and you're done playing it. At this point, your silence begins to carry weight. Your lack of reaction leaves them disoriented, and your calm demeanor becomes the strongest proof that their control is slipping. Of course, this isn't easy to do, especially if you're used to reacting, explaining, or trying to clarify things. But every time you choose silence over arguing, every time you paused before sending that emotionally charged message, you reclaim a little more of your own power. Emotional neutrality is not apathy, it's emotional maturity. It requires you to pause your instinctive response, step back, observe, and decide what's truly worth your emotional energy. And when you begin to act from that place, not from emotional reactivity but from conscious choice, you become far less susceptible to manipulation. You become the one who decides what affects you and what doesn't. To the narcissist, this is unacceptable. They feel like they're talking to a wall. No reaction, no energy, no familiar roles to play with, and when they no longer get an emotional payoff from you, they are forced to retreat. Emotional neutrality isn't a defensive strategy, it's a powerful and intentional move. It declares, I've seen the whole game, and I'm no longer playing. In the next part, we'll explore what happens when an empath stops investing energy into saving the relationship and instead pours that energy into rebuilding their own life. No longer living in reaction, but living by conscious design. Are you ready for that shift? Because from here on out, we're done talking about the manipulator. The spotlight now returns to the only place it ever truly belonged: you. Step 4. Reconnect with your own life. By this point, you've recognized the manipulation pattern, set firm boundaries, and begun to maintain emotional neutrality. And now something else emerges, something quiet, yet deeply real, the space that belongs to your own life. Because during your time entangled with a narcissist, you were slowly pulled away from yourself. Bit by bit, you lost connection with the things that once made you happy, the pieces of your identity that once defined who you were. You stopped taking care of yourself. You distanced yourself from others. You gave up your hobbies, your passions, your beliefs, even your inner voice, all in an effort to preserve the stability of a toxic relationship. Now is the time to do the one thing a narcissist never wanted you to do. Return to the center of your own life. Reconnecting with your life isn't just surface-level self-care. It's not just going out, reading a book, or trying something new. It's a deep, intentional process where you begin to reclaim your identity, your purpose, and your right to exist as a whole, independent human being. You begin to ask questions that you never had space to ask before. What do I actually enjoy? How do I want to start my mornings? Who was I before this relationship consumed me? What makes me feel like I'm truly myself again? Then you start small, going to bed on time, eating foods that nourish you, taking a walk, calling an old friend, rebuying a book you once loved, writing a few lines in a journal. Slowly, you begin to remember you once had a world, and that world is worth rebuilding, and something amazing happens. The energy you once poured into keeping the relationship from falling apart is now being channeled into life itself. You begin to feel clearer, you breathe easier, you realize that you can exist fully without being defined by someone else's emotions. Of course, the narcissist will sense this shift. They won't say it outright, but they'll feel their power fading, because you're no longer orbiting them. You're no longer placing them at the top of your priority list. They're no longer the emotional axis of your universe. You are no longer the mirror reflecting their ego. You've returned to being a real, autonomous person. And the truth is, they don't know how to handle that. They may try to pull you back, they may escalate, dramatize, threaten to leave, or even feign remorse. But this time, your response is different. Because now you have a new reference point, your life. You start to see clearly that you no longer need to carry someone else's emotional weight. You don't need to sacrifice your peace to hold on to a relationship built on control. And you no longer need to prove your worth. All you need is to live in alignment with yourself. Reconnecting with your life is a quiet act, but one of immense power. Because when you return to your true self, the narcissist understands the game is over. Not because you fought them, but because you withdrew, quietly, decisively, completely. In the next and final part, you'll do the one thing a narcissist fears most. Speak the truth. Not to force them to change, but to affirm once and for all, I see it now, I understand, and I will no longer be silent. Are you ready to step into the final stage of emotional freedom? Step 5. Speak the truth. This is the final moment, and also the most powerful one. The moment you look directly at everything that has happened and choose to speak the truth. No more avoiding, no more making excuses for them, no more staying silent to keep the peace. No more telling yourself maybe they didn't mean to. This time, you pause. Take a deep breath and say clearly, I was manipulated, I was disrespected. My emotions were used to control me, and I will no longer stay silent. The truth doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to come with accusations or drama. When spoken with calm and steady conviction, the truth has more power than any outburst, because it shatters the entire illusion the narcissist tried to create. Throughout the relationship, you were trained to stay quiet. You were asked to understand them, to forgive them, to make space for their pain, while your own emotions were denied, twisted, or even used against you. You became used to holding it in. You learned to shrink, to pull back, to compromise, because you believed your silence might save the relationship. But now you realize that very silence was the soil where manipulation grew. So when you begin to speak the truth, you are withdrawing your participation in the lie. You are no longer keeping secrets for someone who hurt you. You are no longer protecting their image at the expense of your own healing. You are no longer letting them rewrite the story, because now you're writing it in your own voice. Here's the truth you must understand. You don't speak out so that they'll admit it. They might deny it, twist it, explode. That's not your concern. You don't speak to gain their agreement. You speak because you need to hear yourself. You speak to step out of the shadows they kept you in. And the strange thing is, when you speak the truth, fear begins to dissolve. You no longer feel small, You no longer feel like you need permission to feel what you feel. Instead, you start to feel strong, clear, and unburdened, as if, for the first time in a long time, you've reclaimed the power of your own voice. To the narcissist, truth is their greatest threat. Their entire power structure depends on vagueness, indirectness, and silence. They operate in the gray zone, where no one dares to name what's really happening. But once the truth is spoken, not with hatred, but with clarity and certainty, their illusions begin to fall apart. And here's what matters most. You're not just speaking the truth about them. You're speaking the truth about yourself, about what you truly felt but once denied, about the boundaries you broke just to be loved, about the reality that you deserve far, far more than that. From that moment forward, you step into freedom, not because you won, but because you're no longer playing their game. You've made it to the end of this journey, and if you're still here, it means you've been brave enough to face the truth, clear enough to understand it, and strong enough to begin a new chapter. Not everyone is willing to look truth in the eye. Not everyone has the courage to break the cycle of manipulation they once called love. But you just did. You dared to name what you once kept silent. You dared to stop and choose yourself. This journey isn't about rebellion. It's about return, a return to yourself, the self that had been buried under hope, under empathy, under the fear of hurting someone else. But now, you no longer need to apologize for feeling deeply, for trusting too much, or for staying too long. You only need one thing: to move forward, with clarity. You're no longer living to please others, you're living to protect your inner peace. You're no longer seeking validation from someone who once hurt you, because by choosing the truth, you've already affirmed your worth. If what you've just heard touches something deep within you, stay, keep going. Let me walk with you through the next parts of your healing journey, where you no longer have to pretend to be strong, where you don't have to avoid pain, and where you no longer need to shrink yourself just to be kept around. And if you're ready, I invite you to share just one thing, only one, in the comments below, not to vent, but to affirm that you've seen, you've understood, and you've chosen not to go back. Subscribe to the channel, not for a number, but because this journey is meant to be walked with others. And I'll be here whenever you need a reminder that you are not alone. See you in the next video, where you no longer live to be chosen, but live because you have chosen yourself.